Hi friends and welcome back. So I have to move my mom to Idaho, which means I've got to go up and I've got to pack the boxes and load them into a moving van and basically drive the van there. So I'm not going to be able to continue this week with the nature of sound, and this should be the last episode of that before we continue and we go into actual music theory and, notes and clefs and all that, chords, all that, which will be great. But at any rate, I didn't want to go a week without putting out a video. So I thought this week it might be kind of fun to talk about virtual instruments. And perhaps some of you aren't really aware that virtual instruments exist or what they are. So briefly, what it is imagine a trumpet player in the studio. And they ask the trumpet player to play one note at a time. So maybe you play a C. So the trumpet player plays a C and they record it. And then what they do is they take that C note. By the way, it's sustained a long time, as long as probably the guy can hold on. And what they'll do is they'll take that one note, they'll slice it up into the attack portion, the sustain portion, and the decay portion. And what that means is the attack is the initial attack of the note when the note first happens. And then, of course, you have the sustain part, and that's just the held part of the note. And then at the end, of course, you have the decay. And what they'll do is they'll assign it to a C on the keyboard, the exact same pitch that would exist on the keyboard. And they'll actually make what's called an entire sample library out of that trumpet. So you can go buy trumpet sample libraries, and you can trigger the sound of a real trumpet from a keyboard. And so what happens is when you press a key, for example, if I play that C, you're triggering the attack part of that C. And then as you hold the note down, you enter the sustain part. And what they'll often do is they'll loop the sustain part. So you could actually play something completely unrealistic, like a real trumpet player would run out of breath, but you could hold that note indefinitely. And so the sustain part lasts until you let go of the key. And as soon as you let go of the key and your finger comes up from the keyboard senses the release and it triggers the decay portion of that sample. So I hope that makes sense. At any rate, what people will do is they'll buy, like me, for example, they'll buy sample libraries and they'll make full orchestrations, or they'll do all sorts of things with them. You can make recordings of bands, any kind of music, really. Steel drum groups, Caribbean groups, heavy metal, whatever you want. They have sample libraries for all of that. But the point is that you can really use it to create music, and probably a lot, I would probably estimate even maybe the majority of the music that you hear in movies these days, documentaries and television shows probably definitely, is sample libraries. They sound like real instruments, but in reality, it's just some guy sitting at a computer playing it all, entering all the parts in on a keyboard. So anyway, enough said. I wanted to show you what's called a mock-up. And what a mock-up is that you basically take a real performance of something, and then you use sample libraries to make it sound as realistic as possible. So what I chose is Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide for the Orchestra. And what you're going to see here is there's two audio recordings here. One audio recording is the real orchestra playing it, and the other audio recording is actually me sitting at home on a keyboard with a computer playing all the parts in, trying to make it sound as realistic as possible. So I'm going to play both of these now. And this is A, by the way, that I'm clicking. And this is audio track B. So we've got A and B. And so I'm going to play them both. And let's see if you can guess which one's the real recording. So here we go. So that's A. Here's B. So which one was the real recording? Any guess? Is it A or is it B? Well, the answer is actually B. That's the real recording. And this is my mock-up. So anyway, so we're going to leave Pro Tools now. I want to show you exactly what I did and how I do it. So here we are in Cubase, and in case you were wondering why I use both programs, first of all, both of them are called Digital Audio Workstations, or DAWs, DAWs for short. And the reason why I use both of them is because they both have different strengths. For example, Pro Tools is better at manipulating digital audio, while Cubase is better at virtual instruments. So right now we're in Cubase and using those virtual instruments, and as you can see, I've got piccolo here, flute 1 enabled, flute 2 disabled right now. And the reason why I'm disabling some of these instruments is because they're resource intensive, and right now I'm trying to do screen capture, so normally I wouldn't do this, but I want you to hear the primary instrument. So we got piccolo, flute 1, flute 2 is disabled, oboe 1, oboe 2 is disabled, clarinet 1, clarinet 2 is disabled, and bassoon 1 and bassoon 2, which is disabled. So what I'm going to do right now is play each of these individually. And what I'm doing is I'm actually playing the keyboard, and I'm using a breath controller, kind of like I'm blowing through this tube basically. And the breath controller that I'm using is called TE control, or Tech Control, I guess. It's MIDI breath and bite controller too. Great controller. So anyway, here we go, and I'm just going to open this up. As you can see, I have all these different what's called articulations mapped. I mapped them out myself, and I'll explain what articulations are in a minute. But anyway, here's what they sound like. And right now I'm going to play the keyboard. You'll probably be able to hear the clicking of the keyboard as I play, actually. And if you watch right here, you'll see the keys move. So here we go. And I also want you to notice this right here as this moves up and down. It's called a mod wheel, or modulation wheel. It's mod wheel for short. It's on the keyboard. My breath controller actually controls this too, though. The harder I blow, the higher that goes. And what that's doing is it's changing the volume. So if you watch, so that's the piccolo. Here's the flute. The oboe. And then finally the bassoon. So anyway, what's going on here? So I've got all the stuff mapped out, and as you can see, it says legato. What these are separate articulations. And what I mean by articulations is if you think about somebody holding a long sustained note, that's actually called legato. So that would be, you know, this note right here. I'm going to just change it here. But what if I want a short note? Well, here's a short note. And so they've actually not only sampled the long notes, but they've sampled portatos, and they've also sampled staccatos and then staccato short. So even the difference between this is even shorter. And then sforzandos, which is basically a blast up front, really a hard attack, and then a quiet release. And the way that I control these is with foot switches. So I can, for example, I can play long lines, and I'm doing this right now. I'm using a foot switch, basically a pedal board that has switches on it, to select my different articulations. For example, I can play a legato line and switch straight to a staccato short line, like this. Okay, so what's going on here is if you look at this right here, this is like basically a piano roll, and I'll solo these so you can hear what's going on. Here we go. And as you're following along, these are all the notes. And right down here are my different foot switch messages. So as I go from short to long, you'll notice that these are all changing. These are called program change messages. So I'm going to add some more parts now. So here we go. Now I'll add them one at a time. So if I add them all together, which, as you can tell, that gets you pretty close to what the original was. Okay, so then what I did is I took all these parts, the piccolo, the flute 1, flute 2, oboe 1, oboe 2, clarinet 1, clarinet 2, bassoon 1 and bassoon 2, and I basically made an actual audio recording of all these, and that's what this is right here that you see right here. So now we'll listen to that. So that sounds pretty close, but not exactly right. If you listen to the original recording, you'll hear both record crackles, because it was actually recorded from a record, and you'll hear some noise, like kind of tape machine noise of sorts. So here's the original. And you also hear a lot of ambience. And what I mean by that is it sounds like it's in a room, kind of far away. So what I did is I actually went here and I added to this a tape plugin. And what that is, it's a tape machine plugin. What this is this is a sample of an actual tape machine, how it responds. So what they'll do is they'll send a signal through one end of the tape machine, and then they'll record it at the other end, and they'll look at the difference between the two signals, the going in versus the going out. And then they'll write algorithms basically to make this plugin sound just like the tape machine. So if you listen to this, if I turn this off, you hear there's no hiss. And then if I turn it back on again, do you hear it? Off, on, off, on. So that adds the hiss that I was looking for to make it sound like the other. And then what about the crackling from the record player? Well, there's something called iZotope vinyl, which is actually freeware. And you've got the mechanical noise of the record player, the wear on the record, the electrical noise from the machine, dust, scratches, warp depth. So anyway, this is what this sounds like. You hear it? So I've got those two, but I still haven't got the reverb. What I use for that is, again, another plugin which emulates a hardware reverb. And what reverb does is it makes a sound source sounds like it's in a room, or perhaps a hall, or perhaps a big giant canyon. So I added this, and what I'll do now is I'll play the mock-up, and I'll add each of these separately so you can hear them. So here we go. This is dry, nothing added. Now I'm going to add a little bit of the hiss. Here's some tape crackling. And then finally, we're going to add reverb to kind of put it into a room, give it a little distance and depth. Without the record crackling, without the hiss. With the hiss, crackling, and the reverb. One last step I forgot to mention is that I also add a final EQ just to kind of clean up the mid-range in it. So here's without, and it's very subtle. You may or may not hear it. That's with, this is without. Without and with. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and that's a little short explanation on virtual instruments. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.